Coffee stained the pristine Italian wool of a bespoke Tom Ford suit worth more than Ellie's entire year's rent. Most people would expect to be fired, sued, or at the very least yelled at. But when she spilled a scorching macchiato on Sebastian Russo, the ruthless head of the city's most dangerous syndicate, the rules of reality warped. He didn't reach for his concealed weapon. He didn't demand compensation. Instead, he wiped his lapel, looked her dead in the eye, and demanded her hand in marriage. Tuesday mornings at Stumptown Coffee Roasters in Cobble Hill were always a chaotic symphony of hissing espresso machines, clinking ceramic mugs, and the impatient tapping of designer leather shoes. For Ellie Donovan, it was just another grueling shift in a string of endless days. At 24, her life was a precarious house of cards, built on minimum wage double shifts and mounting medical bills from Mount Sinai Hospital, where her mother was battling aggressive leukemia. She was exhausted, running on empty, and one minor disaster away from a total breakdown. At exactly 7:15 a.m., the atmosphere in the cafe shifted. It wasn't a gradual change. It was an immediate suffocating drop in barometric pressure. The usual chatter of investment bankers and tech startup bros evaporated. She looked up from the steam wand, wiping milk froth from her apron, to see why the ambient noise had suddenly died. 4 men had walked through the glass doors. 3 of them were built like freight trains, wearing dark, nondescript suits that bulged slightly at the waistlines. They fanned out their eyes, scanning the room with terrifying clinical precision, but it was the man in the center who commanded the room's absolute obedience. Sebastian Russo didn't just walk into a room, he owned it the second his foot crossed the threshold. He was a man woven from urban legends and whispered warnings in the dark corners of New York's elite circles. Tall, broad-shouldered, and possessing a kind of brutal aristocratic elegance, he was dressed in a flawless charcoal-grey bespoke Tom Ford suit. The platinum Patek Philippe watch on his left wrist caught the morning light, a subtle flash of staggering wealth. His features were sharply carved, his jawline shadowed with a hint of stubble, and his eyes were a cold, unreadable obsidian. Her manager, Arthur, squeaked from the pastry case, practically shrinking into the floorboards. Everyone in Brooklyn knew who the Russos were, even if they pretended not to. They were legitimate businessmen, on paper, real estate developers, import-export magnates. But the blood running through their corporate veins was pure organized crime. "Keep your head down, Ellie," Arthur hissed, grabbing a rag and furiously wiping a spotlessly clean counter. Ellie swallowed hard, nodding. She grabbed a fresh paper cup, writing the next order with a trembling Sharpie. "Venti caramel macchiato, extra hot." The man who stepped up to her register wasn't Sebastian, but one of his enforcers, a hulking brute with a jagged scar cutting through his left eyebrow. "Black coffee. Large. Boiling." He grunted, slamming a crisp $100 bill onto the counter. "Keep the change. Make it fast." Yes, sir. Right away." Her hands shook as she grabbed a large cup. She brewed the dark roast, the scent of bitter earth filling her nose. She securely snapped the plastic lid onto the scalding black coffee and turned to hand it across the counter. At the exact same moment, she grabbed the extra hot caramel macchiato for the previous customer with her left hand. She stepped out from behind the counter to hand the macchiato to the waiting customer by the pickup station. She was moving too fast, entirely blinded by the sheer anxiety vibrating in the room. She didn't see the sleek, black, Italian leather Oxford shoe stepping directly into her path. Her toe caught the edge of Sebastian Russo's shoe. Time didn't just slow down, it ground to a nauseating, agonizing halt. She felt her center of gravity pitch forward. Her arms flailed instinctively to catch her balance, and in doing so, her grip on the venti macchiato failed. The flimsy plastic lid popped off like a champagne cork. A tidal wave of 200-degree milk espresso and sticky caramel syrup erupted from the cup. It soared through the air in a graceful, devastating arc, landing directly on the chest of Sebastian Russo. The liquid hit his crisp white dress shirt and the lapel of that $10,000 charcoal suit with a sickening splat. Dark, muddy stains bloomed instantly across the expensive fabric. Steam rose from his chest, carrying the sweet scent of vanilla and burnt sugar. A collective gasp sucked all the oxygen out of the room. It was so quiet she could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the back room. Ellie hit the floor hard, scraping her knees against the ceramic tiles, but the physical pain was eclipsed by the sheer, unadulterated terror, freezing the blood in her veins. She scrambled backward, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. "Boss!" The scarred enforcer roared his hand instantly, darting inside his jacket fingers, wrapping around the grip of a concealed firearm. The other two men surged forward, boxing her in their faces, twisted in violent fury. She squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the impact, bracing for the end of her life, right there in the middle of Stumptown Coffee. "I'm so sorry, Mom," she thought. "I'm so sorry." "Stand down, Matteo." The voice was low, smooth, and laced with absolute authority. It wasn't a yell yet. It resonated through the silent cafe like thunder. She opened one eye. Matteo froze his hand still inside his coat. He slowly withdrew it, stepping back, though his eyes remained locked on her, with murderous intent. Sebastian Russo looked down at his ruined suit. He didn't brush at it. He didn't curse. He slowly reached into his pocket, retrieved a folded silk handkerchief, and dabbed mildly at the sticky caramel dripping from his lapel. Then he looked down at her. His dark eyes were devoid of anger. Instead, there was a strange, terrifying calculation in them. "Get up!" he commanded softly. Her legs felt like lead, but the sheer force of his command compelled her muscles to obey. She scrambled to her feet, her knees knocking together. She was hyperventilating her hands, clutching the dirty apron tied around her waist. I'm so incredibly sorry, Mr. Russo." She stammered the words, tumbling out of her mouth in a panicked rush. "I tripped. It was an accident. I swear to God, I'll pay for the cleaning. I'll buy you a new suit, I promise, even if it takes me years. Sebastian raised a single hand. Just an inch. The motion silenced her instantly. He stared at her, his gaze dragging over her messy bun, her pale, terrified face, the name tag pinned askew on her chest, and finally her scuffed, cheap sneakers. He was analyzing her, dissecting her under a microscope. The silence stretched until it felt like a physical weight pressing on her chest. "Arthur," Sebastian said, not breaking eye contact with her. Behind the counter, Arthur let out a pathetic squeak. Yes, Mr. Russo." "Empty the cafe. Clear everyone out. Lock the doors. Flip the sign to closed." "Immediately, sir." The cafe erupted into a frantic scramble. Customers who had just paid for their drinks abandoned them, fleeing through the glass doors as if the building were on fire. Within 60 seconds, the bustling coffee shop was a ghost town. Arthur locked the front door, flipped the sign, and practically sprinted into the back office, shutting the door behind him. They were alone. Just Ellie Sebastian and his 3 massive shadows. "Matteo, wait outside," Sebastian ordered, waving a hand toward the door. "But boss, outside now." Matteo's jaw tightened, but he nodded sharply, gesturing for the other 2 men to follow him. The door chimed cheerfully as they exited, standing guard on the sidewalk, their broad backs to the glass. Sebastian finally looked away from her, moving toward a leather booth in the corner of the shop. He slid into the seat, unbothered by the sticky syrup clinging to his chest. He gestured to the empty seat across from him. "Sit, Ellie." Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She walked on trembling legs and slid into the booth opposite him, keeping her back pressed hard against the leather. "I know who you are, Ellie Donovan," he said softly, folding his stained handkerchief and placing it on the table. "I know you work here from 6 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon. I know you work as a bartender in Queens from 5 until midnight. I know you're drowning in debt from Mount Sinai." Her breath hitched. How did he know that? Why are you looking into me?" "I notice everything in my city," he replied smoothly. "And I have been looking for someone very specific for the past 3 weeks. Someone invisible. Someone desperate. Someone with a clean record, no family ties that matter other than a dying mother, and no significant other." She bristled slightly, a flash of defensive anger cutting through her terror. "My mother is not dying. She's receiving treatment." Sebastian's lips twitched in what might have been the ghost of a smile. "Treatment that will be suspended next week when your grace period for the overdue $80,000 expires." The fight drained out of her instantly. Her shoulders slumped. He was right. The billing department had called her yesterday. If she didn't come up with a miracle by next Friday, her mum was out. "What do you want from me?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "I don't have anything. If you want to kill me for the suit, just do it." Sebastian let out a low, dark chuckle. It was a terrifying sound. "I don't want to kill you, Ellie. In fact, your clumsiness this morning was a stroke of divine intervention. You just auditioned for a role, and you got the part." "A role?" He leaned forward, placing his large, heavily ringed hands on the table. "I am expanding my family's operations into Nevada, legitimate operations. High-end casinos, luxury hotels. The Nevada Gaming Commission is notoriously strict. They are looking for any excuse to deny my licenses based on my family's colorful history in New York." She stared at him, bewildered. "What does that have to do with me?" "My legal counsel has advised me that I need to soften my image. I need to appear grounded, stable, and deeply committed to a wholesome lifestyle. A ruthless bachelor with a reputation for violence does not get the green light in Vegas. A devoted family man, however, does." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "I need a wife." Sebastian stated, his voice devoid of any emotion. "A clean civilian wife. Someone sweet, unremarkable, and desperate enough to play the part perfectly without asking questions or expecting a real marriage." Her jaw dropped. The coffee grinder in the back hummed loudly, filling the stunned silence. You want me to marry you? Over a spilled coffee." "The coffee was merely the catalyst. It brought you into my direct line of sight. You fit the profile perfectly." He reached inside his jacket, pulling out a sleek silver pen and a blank checkbook from a high-tier offshore bank. He clicked the pen, the sound loud in the quiet room. "We will be married for exactly 2 years. During that time, you will live in my home. You will attend galas, dinners, and charity events on my arm. You will smile for the cameras. You will convince the Nevada Commission and the world that I am a reformed, loving husband." He began writing on the check. "In exchange, I will clear all of your mother's medical debt today. I will move her to the VIP oncology wing at New York Presbyterian with the best specialists money can buy. And at the end of the 2 years, when the divorce is quietly finalized," he tore the check from the book and slid it across the table. Ellie looked down, her vision blurred. Written in elegant, sweeping cursive was her name, Ellie Donovan, and in the amount box was the number $5,000. $5 million. This is insane, she breathed, pushing the check back slightly. You are Sebastian Russo. You could have any supermodel, any heiress in the world. Heiresses come with powerful fathers who meddle in my business, he countered coldly. Models come with paparazzi and scandals. I don't want a partner, Ellie. I want an employee. You will be my wife in name only. You will be safe, you will be wealthy, and your mother will live. All you have to do is sign a piece of paper and play house. He stood up, towering over the booth. The ruined suit suddenly seemed entirely irrelevant. My driver will be waiting outside your apartment in Astoria tomorrow morning at 8:00 a.m. If you get in the car, we have a deal. If you don't, this conversation never happened, and you can figure out how to pay Mount Sinai on your own. He turned on his heel and walked toward the door. Without looking back, he unlocked it, stepped out into the morning air, and disappeared into a waiting black SUV, leaving her alone in the cafe with a $5 million check and the shattered remains of her reality. The subway ride back to Astoria felt like a hallucination. The rattling of the train cars, the flickering fluorescent lights, the smell of ozone, and damp earth, none of it felt real. She held her ratty canvas tote bag tightly against her chest, the $5 million check burning a hole in the front pocket. When she unlocked the door to her cramped third-floor walk-up, the reality of her life hit her like a physical blow. The radiator was clanking loudly, struggling to produce heat. A stack of envelopes marked "Urgent and Final Notice" sat on the cheap laminate kitchen counter. Her roommate Sarah was sitting on the sagging thrift store sofa, painting her toenails. She looked up, raising a perfectly arched eyebrow. "You're home early. Arthur finally fire you for giving away free scones to the homeless guy?" "No," Ellie said, her voice hollow. She dropped her keys into the bowl. "I spilled coffee on someone." "So people spill coffee every day, Chloe. Take a breath." "I spilled it on Sebastian Russo." Sarah's nail polish brush froze mid-air. A drop of neon pink polish fell onto the faded rug. She stared at Ellie, all the color draining from her face. "Russo, the head of the Cosa Nostra. Russo, Ellie. Tell me you're joking." "I'm not." Ellie walked into her tiny bedroom and sat on the edge of the mattress. She didn't tell Sarah the rest. She couldn't. If Sarah knew about the offer, she would think Ellie had completely lost her mind. She pulled out her phone and looked at the lock screen. It was a picture of her mom taken before the chemo made her hair fall out. She was smiling, vibrant, alive. She unlocked the phone and checked her banking app. Available balance 42 centavos. The choice was already made. It wasn't a choice at all. She didn't sleep that night. She sat by the window watching the street lights flicker against the wet pavement. By 7:30 a.m., she was showered, dressed in her best and only professional outfit, a modest navy blue dress she had bought at Goodwill for job interviews, and pacing the sidewalk in front of her building. At exactly 7:59 a.m., a massive midnight black Maybach glided silently down the street, coming to a smooth halt right in front of her. The tinted rear window rolled down an inch. The driver, a broad-shouldered man she recognized from the cafe, stepped out and opened the rear door. "Miss Donovan," he said, his voice flat. She took a deep breath, the cold morning air filling her lungs, and stepped into the vehicle. The interior smelled of rich leather and expensive cedarwood cologne. They drove in silence for nearly an hour, leaving the cramped streets of Queens behind, crossing into Staten Island, and winding their way up a heavily wooded private road. They arrived at a massive iron gate, flanked by high stone walls topped with security cameras. The gate swung open smoothly, revealing an estate that belonged in a modern Gothic movie. A sprawling slate-grey mansion sat at the center of manicured lawns, surrounded by a fleet of luxury cars and men in dark suits patrolling the perimeter with aggressive vigilance. Her stomach twisted into painful knots as the Maybach pulled up to the grand entrance. The door was opened for her before the car even fully stopped. She was escorted through a cavernous foyer, featuring a dual sweeping staircase and a massive crystal chandelier. The silence in the house was heavy, oppressive. It didn't feel like a home. It felt like a fortress. The guard led her down a long hallway, lined with dark wood paneling, stopping in front of heavy double doors. He knocked twice, then opened them, stepping aside to let her pass. It was a library, straight out of an architectural digest, with walls lined with thousands of leather-bound books and a massive mahogany desk at the center. Sitting behind the desk was Sebastian Russo. Today he wore a crisp black shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms corded with muscle and faint, intricate tattoos peeking out from beneath his cuffs. Standing to his right was a sharp-featured man with wire-rimmed glasses and a tailored grey suit. "You came," Sebastian said, looking up from a file. His voice was neutral, but she caught a flicker of satisfaction in his dark eyes. "I didn't have a choice," she replied, keeping her chin high despite the trembling in her knees. "There's always a choice, Ellie. You just made the smart one." He gestured to the man beside him. "This is Harrison, my legal counsel. He has the paperwork." Harrison stepped forward, offering a curt nod. He placed a thick stack of papers on the edge of the desk, sliding a gold Montblanc pen next to it. "Miss Donovan." Harrison began, his tone clinical. "This is a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement, a prenuptial agreement, and the marriage license which has been expedited through a contact at City Hall. The terms are as Mr. Russo outlined. 2 years. Absolute fidelity in the public eye. You will reside in the east wing of this estate. You will follow Mr. Russo's security protocols without question. Upon the dissolution of the marriage, you walk away with the agreed-upon sum, and you never speak of this arrangement or anything you see or hear within these walls under penalty of—" Harrison paused, adjusting his glasses. "Severe legal and personal repercussions." She looked at the stack of paper. It looked like a death warrant. "What about my mother?" she asked, looking directly at Sebastian. Sebastian slid a separate piece of paper toward her. It was a receipt from Mount Sinai, paid in full. Below it was a transfer confirmation to New York Presbyterian's elite oncology ward. "She's being moved as we speak," Sebastian said. "A private ambulance picked her up 20 minutes ago." Tears pricked the corners of her eyes. He had actually done it. The crushing weight of the debt that had been suffocating her for a year vanished in an instant. She owed this terrifying man her mother's life. She picked up the heavy gold pen. Her hand was shaking so badly she could barely form the letters, but she pressed the nib to the paper and signed her name. Ellie Donovan. Over and over again on the dotted lines, trading her freedom for a gilded cage. She signed the final page, the marriage license. She pushed the stack back toward Harrison. "It's done," she whispered. Sebastian stood up, walking slowly around the desk until he was standing mere inches from her. He was so tall she had to tilt her head back to look into his eyes. He reached out his warm, rough thumb, gently brushing a stray tear from her cheek. The contact sent a jolt of electricity down her spine. "Welcome to the family, Mia Moli," he murmured, his voice suddenly thick with a dark, dangerous promise. Before she could process the intimacy of his touch, the world exploded. A deafening crack shattered the heavy silence of the library. The massive floor-to-ceiling bay window behind the desk violently exploded inward, showering the room in a deadly rain of jagged glass. In a fraction of a second, Sebastian's demeanor shifted from calm arrogance to lethal instinct. He didn't hesitate. He lunged at her, his massive arms wrapping around her waist, tackling her hard to the Persian rug. "Get down!" he roared. She hit the floor with bone-jarring force, Sebastian's heavy muscular body covering hers, completely shielding her from the spray of glass and wood splinters. Thwack! Thwack! 2 more high-caliber bullets tore through the room, embedding themselves into the mahogany door frame, right where her head had been, seconds before. The air filled with the acrid smell of gunpowder and pulverized plaster. Alarms began to shriek violently throughout the estate, a deafening, pulsing siren that vibrated in her teeth. Outside the library doors she could hear the sudden chaotic shouting of men and the terrifying metallic clack-clack of assault rifles being racked. "Harrison, secure the perimeter!" Sebastian barked over the blaring alarms, not moving an inch off her trembling body. She lay trapped beneath him, her face pressed into the carpet, her ears ringing and her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst through her ribs. The intoxicating scent of his cedarwood cologne was mixed with the sharp scent of danger. She had just signed a contract to pretend to be a Mafia boss's wife to save her mother. But as she lay on the floor under a hail of sniper fire, the terrifying, bloody truth of her new reality set in. There was nothing pretend about this world, and she was trapped in the crossfire. Gunfire echoed through the sprawling Staten Island estate, a violent staccato that shattered any lingering illusions she had about her new life. Lying on the Persian rug beneath Sebastian Russo's crushing weight, she squeezed her eyes shut, trembling as the smell of pulverized drywall and cordite filled the library. "Clear!" a voice roared from the hallway. It was Matteo. Sebastian didn't move immediately. He stayed positioned over her for 5 agonizing seconds, his breathing steady and controlled a stark contrast to her hyperventilation. Only when the heavy boots of his security detail swarmed the room did he finally shift his weight. He stood up in one fluid motion, pulling her off the floor by her upper arm. His grip was bruising, but his eyes were entirely devoid of panic. "Are you hit?" he demanded, his voice a low, terrifying growl. He was patting down her shoulders, checking her navy blue dress for blood. No, she stammered, her teeth chattering uncontrollably. "I'm okay. I'm fine. Take her to the East Wing. Post 4 men at the door." Sebastian barked at a guard. He turned his attention to his lawyer Harrison, who was brushing glass off his tailored suit with terrifying calm. "Find out how they bypassed the perimeter. If it was the Moretti family, I want their Brooklyn safe houses reduced to ash by midnight." She was ushered out of the ruined library before she could even process the order he had just given. Reduced to ash. He was casually ordering a war. The next 3 weeks blurred into a surreal, suffocating routine. Her East Wing was not just a bedroom. It was a sprawling 2,000-square-foot penthouse suite, locked behind biometric security doors. She had a marble bathroom the size of her entire Astoria apartment, a walk-in closet stocked with clothes from Bergdorf Goodman, and a private balcony overlooking the manicured grounds. But it was a cage. A beautiful, terrifying golden cage. Her only tether to reality was her mother. True to his word, Sebastian had moved her to the VIP Oncology Pavilion at New York Presbyterian Hospital. When she finally visited her, flanked by 2 plainclothes bodyguards who waited in the hall, she broke down in tears. Her mother was resting in a private suite filled with fresh orchids, hooked up to state-of-the-art monitors, her skin already looking less sallow. "Oh, Ellie," her mother whispered, squeezing her hand from her hospital bed. "The doctor's here. They say the new immunotherapy trial could push me into full remission. But sweetheart, how you told me you met an investor. But this costs a fortune." "He's a very generous man, Mum." She lied, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "We fell in love fast. He just wants to take care of us." She looked at her with tired, skeptical eyes. but she was too exhausted to press further. Ellie spent hours brushing her thinning hair, playing the role of the blushing newlywed, all while knowing her husband was likely orchestrating violent retributions from his Staten Island fortress. Sebastian and Ellie rarely spoke during those first few weeks. They passed like ghosts in the massive hallways of the estate. When they did interact, it was purely transactional. He brought in a team of etiquette coaches, publicists, and stylists. She was poked, prodded, and polished. Her cheap sneakers were replaced with Christian Louboutin heels. Her messy bun traded for a sleek, expensive blowout. The Nevada Gaming Commission was arriving in New York for a preliminary evaluation. Her debut as Mrs. Sebastian Russo was scheduled for a high-profile charity gala at the Plaza Hotel. The pressure was suffocating. The night before the gala, Sebastian summoned her to his private study. She walked in, wearing a simple silk robe over her pajamas. He was sitting in a leather armchair, a crystal glass of amber liquid in his hand, staring into a crackling fireplace. The firelight cast sharp shadows across his jawline. "Sit," he commanded softly, gesturing to the chair opposite him. She sat wrapping the robe tightly around her waist. "Your publicist gave me the dossier on the Nevada delegates. I've memorized their names, their wives' names, and their preferred charities." Sebastian took a slow sip of his drink. His dark eyes locked onto hers, stripping away the rehearsed confidence she had tried to build. "Tomorrow night is not just about memorizing names, Ellie. It is about selling a lie so profound that even my enemies believe it. The Moretti family will have eyes at this gala. The press will be circling like vultures." He leaned forward, placing his glass on the side table. "When the cameras flash, you are not Ellie Donovan, the terrified barista. You are my wife. You are the only thing in this world I care about. You will look at me with absolute adoration, and I will do the same." "I can act," she said defensively, her heart picking up a nervous rhythm. "We will see," he murmured. He stood up, closing the distance between them until he was standing over her chair. He reached down his large, warm hand, cupping her cheek. His thumb brushed over her lower lip. The contact was electric, sending a jolt of heat straight to her core. She gasped softly, her eyes fluttering shut for a fraction of a second against her will. "Remember that reaction?" He whispered, his face inches from hers, his breath smelling of expensive scotch and cedar. "Use it tomorrow. If you fail, the licenses are denied, the contract is void, and I stop paying New York Presbyterian." He pulled away abruptly, leaving her cold and breathless in the firelight. It was a brutal reminder this was not a romance. It was a hostage negotiation disguised as a marriage. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was a masterclass in opulent excess. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm, golden glow over hundreds of New York's elite, all draped in couture and dripping in diamonds. Waiters in white tuxedo jackets floated through the crowd with silver trays of champagne and caviar. She stood at the top of the grand staircase, gripping the marble banister. She was wearing a custom-fitted emerald green silk gown that clung to every curve, paired with a diamond necklace from Cartier that felt heavier than a shackle. "Breathe," Sebastian murmured, stepping up beside her. He looked devastatingly handsome in a bespoke black tuxedo. He didn't wait for her response. He laced his fingers through hers, his grip firm and anchoring. "Showtime, Mia Mowgli." As they descended the stairs, the room fell into a hush. Heads turned. Whispers rippled through the crowd like a wave. Flashbulbs from the sanctioned press pool near the entrance erupted in a blinding frenzy. Sebastian's performance was flawless. He pulled her close, his hand resting securely on the small of her back. He smiled, a genuine, breathtaking smile she had never seen before. and leaned down to kiss her temple. To the outside world, he was a reformed kingpin, completely tamed by love. To her, his whisper was a tactical command. 3 o'clock. The balding man in the navy suit. That is Commissioner Sterling from Nevada. We are going to greet him. For the next 2 hours they danced the dance. She laughed at the commissioner's dry jokes. She charmed their wives, talking passionately about the pediatric oncology charity they were supposedly sponsoring, a cause Sebastian had chosen, specifically because he knew she could speak about it with raw, undeniable emotion. It was working. She could see the skepticism melting off the Nevada delegates' faces. They were buying the illusion. Around 11 o'clock, the string quartet began playing a slow waltz. Sebastian excused them from a conversation with the senator and led her to the dance floor. He pulled her flush against his chest, one hand holding hers, the other resting firmly on her waist. "You are doing perfectly," he murmured into her ear, swaying them to the music. "The commissioner just texted his committee. He called you refreshingly authentic." "Does this mean I get a bonus?" She joked the champagne, making her slightly braver than usual. Sebastian let out a low, genuine chuckle that vibrated against her chest. For a fleeting, terrifying moment, looking up into his dark eyes, she forgot about the contract. She forgot about the snipers and the guards. She just felt the overwhelming gravity of the man holding her. Suddenly Matteo materialized at the edge of the dance floor, his face pale. He caught Sebastian's eye and tapped his earpiece. Sebastian's posture instantly stiffened, the romantic facade shattered, replaced by the cold, calculating mob boss. "I need to take care of a security issue," he said softly, his eyes scanning the room. "Stay right here. Do not leave the ballroom. Matteo will watch you." He kissed her cheek for the cameras and vanished into the crowd. She stepped off the dance floor, grabbing a fresh glass of champagne from a passing waiter to calm her suddenly frayed nerves. She stood near a massive floral arrangement, trying to blend into the scenery while keeping an eye out for Matteo. "It's a beautiful dress, Ellie." The voice was smooth, cultured, but laced with a venomous undertone. She turned around. Standing behind her was a man in his late 50s. He wore a maroon velvet dinner jacket and had silver hair slicked back immaculately. His smile was predatory, his eyes a pale, icy blue. "Thank you," she said, politely, taking a step back. "Do I know you? We haven't been formally introduced," the man purred, taking a step forward to close the gap she had just created. "I am Lorenzo Castellano. The Castellano family and the Russos have a long, complicated history in this city." Her blood ran cold. The Castellanos. They were the second largest syndicate in New York, Sebastian's primary rivals. The men Sebastian suspected of the sniper attack. "I think my husband is looking for me, Mr. Castellano. If you'll excuse me." "Oh, I wouldn't rush off, little bird," Lorenzo said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. He stepped so close she could smell the stale cigar smoke clinging to his lapels. "Not when I hold the answers to questions you don't even know to ask." She froze. "I don't know what you're talking about." Lorenzo chuckled, swirling the red wine in his glass. "A minimum-wage barista accidentally spills coffee on the most feared man in New York, and a week later she's wearing a $5 million Cartier necklace. It's a beautiful fairy tale, Ellie. Very Cinderella." "It was a genuine accident," she snapped, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Perhaps the spill was—" Lorenzo conceded, his pale eyes gleaming with malicious delight. "But Sebastian Russo doesn't do anything by accident. Did you really think he picked you out of thin air? A random girl from Queens. He needed a clean record. I fit the profile." "You fit a very specific profile, yes?" Lorenzo sneered. Tell me, Ellie, how much do you remember about your father, Thomas Donovan?" The breath was knocked out of her lungs. Her father had walked out on her mother and her when she was 14. He left a note on the kitchen counter and vanished. "My father is dead to me. He has nothing to do with this." "Oh, but he has everything to do with this," Lorenzo whispered his words, cutting through the elegant music like a serrated knife. "Thomas didn't just walk out on you. He fled. He was a degenerate gambler. He ran an illegal bookmaking operation in the Bronx, and he got sloppy." She shook her head, her hands trembling so badly the champagne spilled over the rim of her glass, staining her fingers. "Stop talking. He owed the Russo family $1.2 million, Ellie," Lorenzo continued mercilessly. Sebastian's father was going to take Thomas's hands. "But Sebastian is a businessman. He let your father run on one condition." Lorenzo leaned in his lips, brushing against her ear. "He claimed his collateral. He told your father that one day, when he needed it, the debt would be paid by the daughter he left behind. You aren't a lucky Cinderella, Ellie. You aren't a PR stunt. You are property. Sebastian has been watching you for 10 years, just waiting to cash in his chip." The ballroom spun wildly. The crystal chandeliers blurred into streaks of blinding light. The deafening chatter of the elite sounded like roaring water in her ears. Lorenzo pulled back, offering a polite, chilling bow. "Enjoy the rest of the gala, Mrs. Russo." He melted back into the crowd, just as Sebastian emerged from a side door. His jaw clenched, his dark eyes instantly locking onto hers from across the room. He began striding toward her, parting the sea of billionaires and politicians with sheer, terrifying presence. He thought he had saved her. He thought he had bought her compliance. But as she stared at the man charging toward her, the man who had secretly owned her life since she was a child, the illusion of the golden cage shattered. She wasn't his fake wife. She was his prisoner, and she was going to make him pay. Sebastian closed the distance between them with the predatory grace of a cornered leopard. The wealthy elite of New York parted for him, instinctively sensing the sudden, lethal drop in the room's temperature. When he reached her, his eyes were black pools of contained fury. He didn't look at the space Lorenzo had just occupied. He looked only at her. He saw the tremble in her hands, the spilled champagne on her emerald silk dress, and the utter betrayal fracturing her expression. "Matteo!" Sebastian snapped without turning his head. His shadow materialized instantly from the crowd. "Lock down the exits! Find Castellano! If he resists, break his legs!" "Wait," she choked out, stepping away from Sebastian when he reached for her arm. The Cartier diamonds around her throat suddenly felt like a hangman's noose. "Don't touch me." His jaw tightened. A flash of something that looked dangerously like panic crossed his stoic features before the impenetrable mask slammed back into place. "Ellie, whatever Lorenzo told you, is it true?" Her voice trembled, but she forced herself to meet his terrifying gaze. "My father, Thomas Donovan. The debt." The silence that stretched between them was absolute, drowning out the string quartet, playing a bright Vivaldi concerto just 50 feet away. Sebastian's expression didn't change, but the micro-shift in his posture, the stiffening of his shoulders, the slight narrowing of his eyes, was all the confirmation she needed. "Not here," Sebastian said, his voice dropping to a harsh, gravelly whisper. "Matteo, secure the bridal suite upstairs. Now." Before she could protest, Sebastian's hand clamped around her wrist. It wasn't a violent grip, but it was an unbreakable one. He marched her out of the grand ballroom, through a maze of gilded corridors, and into a private elevator. The ride up to the penthouse level was suffocating. She stared at the brass doors, tears of humiliation and rage burning her eyes. Everything was a lie. The spilled coffee, the $5 million check, the supposed need to fool the Nevada Gaming Commission. She was a pawn in a decade-long game of Mafia chess. When the elevator chimed and the doors slid open, Sebastian pulled her down the hallway and into a massive, opulent suite overlooking Central Park. Matteo stood guard in the hall, pulling the heavy mahogany doors shut behind them with a definitive click. She ripped her hand out of Sebastian's grasp the second they were alone. "You planned it," she screamed, the sound tearing from her throat. She threw the crystal champagne flute she was still clutching at the wall. It shattered into 1,000 pieces against the custom wallpaper. "The coffee shop, the contract. It wasn't a coincidence you've been stalking me." Sebastian stood perfectly still in the center of the room. He slowly unbuttoned his suit jacket, his chest rising and falling with heavy, measured breaths. "I did not plan the coffee, Ellie. That was genuine fate. But you are correct. I knew exactly who you were the second you tripped over my shoe." "Why?" she demanded, sobbing openly now. "Why me? Why torment a barista who was already drowning? My father abandoned me 10 years ago. I didn't even know he gambled. I didn't know he owed you money." "He didn't owe me money." Sebastian corrected his voice, eerily calm against her hysteria. He walked over to a wet bar, poured 2 fingers of scotch into a glass, and downed it in one swallow. "He owed my father, Vincenzo Russo. My father is a man of the old world, Ellie. He believes in blood for blood. When your father fled the city in 2016, he humiliated our syndicate. He stole $1.2 million from the family's operational fund. So you decided to enslave his daughter to get it back." She spat venom dripping from every word. "No!" Sebastian snarled, slamming the empty glass onto the marble counter with enough force to crack it. He crossed the room in 2 massive strides, backing her up against the edge of a velvet sofa. The cold, calculated Mafia boss was gone. In his place was a man vibrating with raw, unfiltered intensity. "I decided to save you." Sebastian growled, his face inches from hers. 3 months ago, my father's men finally tracked down your father in Chicago. They killed him. But the debt wasn't settled in my father's eyes. The interest had compounded. The insult remained. Vincenzo ordered a hit on you and your mother to wipe the slate clean. The air was sucked out of her lungs. She grabbed the back of the sofa to keep her knees from buckling. A hit. A synchronized execution," Sebastian said mercilessly, forcing her to hear the brutal truth. "I found the dossier on his desk. I saw your picture. I saw the medical bills from Mount Sinai. I knew that if my father's men didn't kill you, the stress of the debt and your mother's illness would." He reached out his large hands, gripping her shoulders. His touch was burning hot. "By the laws of La Cosa Nostra, the only person untouchable by the syndicate is the wife of a Don. A Don's family is sacred. Vincenzo could order the death of Thomas Donovan's daughter. But he cannot touch Sebastian Russo's wife without starting a civil war that would destroy the entire family." She stared up at him, her mind short-circuiting. The golden cage, the oppressive security detail, the bulletproof cars. It wasn't to keep her trapped. It was to keep the rest of his family out. "The Nevada Gaming Commission," she whispered. A convenient truth. Sebastian replied, his thumbs tracing the line of her collarbone just above the Cartier necklace. "I am moving our assets to Vegas. I do need a clean image. Marrying you solved my business problem, and it kept you breathing. Lorenzo Castellano didn't tell you the truth to free you, Ellie. He told you the truth so you would run. Because the second you leave my protection, my father's men will put a bullet in your head, and Lorenzo gets to watch the Russo family tear itself apart." The sheer magnitude of the manipulation crashed over her. She wasn't just a prop. She was the epicenter of a Mafia Cold War. "You should have told me," she cried, hitting his chest with her fists. "You should have given me the choice. If I told you the truth, you would have run straight to the police," Sebastian said, catching her wrists effortlessly and pinning them against his chest. "And the NYPD is on my father's payroll. You would have been dead before you finished giving your statement. I took your choice away because it was the only way to keep your heart beating." Suddenly, the heavy mahogany doors of the suite didn't just open, they exploded off their hinges. The deafening roar of a breached door echoed through the penthouse. Splinters of wood the size of daggers flew across the room. Sebastian didn't hesitate. His reflexes were inhuman. He shoved her hard to the floor behind the velvet sofa, drawing a matte black Sig Sauer from a concealed shoulder holster in a fraction of a second. "Stay down and cover your ears," he roared. The suite erupted into a war zone. The rapid, deafening tat-tat-tat of suppressed automatic fire chewed through the expensive plaster walls, shattering the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. Cold night air and the wail of distant sirens rushed into the room. Lorenzo Castellano hadn't just come to the gala to whisper poison in her ear. He had used their conversation to isolate Sebastian from his main security detail on the ballroom floor. She curled into a tight ball on the floor, pressing her hands over her ears, screaming as chunks of marble and drywall rained down on her back. Through the deafening noise, she heard Sebastian returning fire. His shots were measured precise and lethally calm. Bang! 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 She heard heavy bodies hitting the floor in the hallway. "Matteo!" Sebastian shouted over the gunfire. There was no answer. A man in a tactical mask stepped through the ruined doorway, raising a compact submachine gun directly toward the sofa where she was hiding. Before he could pull the trigger, Sebastian lunged across the open space. It was a suicidal maneuver. Sebastian exposed himself completely to put his body between the gunman and her. He fired twice, hitting the man in the chest, but as the gunman went down, his finger clamped down on the trigger. A wild spray of bullets tore through the room. She heard a sickening wet thud, followed by a sharp grunt of pain from Sebastian. "Sebastian!" she screamed, abandoning her cover and scrambling across the debris-covered floor. He had dropped to one knee behind an overturned marble coffee table, his hand clutching his left side. Blood, dark, thick, and terrifyingly red, was rapidly soaking through his crisp white tuxedo shirt, spreading like a gruesome watercolor painting beneath his jacket. "Get back!" he hissed, his teeth bared in pain. He raised his weapon again, aiming at the doorway, but the hallway was silent. The immediate threat was neutralized, leaving behind the suffocating smell of copper and sulfur. "You're shot!" She panicked, her hands hovering over his bleeding side, not knowing what to do. The anger and betrayal from 5 minutes ago evaporated, replaced by a primal, consuming terror. He had literally thrown himself in front of a bullet for her. "It's a through and through," Sebastian grunted, leaning heavily against the table. His face was losing color rapidly. He pulled a burner phone from his pocket, his bloody thumb dialing a single digit. "Harrison, we have a breach on the penthouse level. Castellano's men. Bring the extraction team to the service elevator. Bring the medic." He dropped the phone and looked at her. His breathing was shallow. He reached out his blood-stained hand, grabbing her chin, forcing her to look into his fading dark eyes. "Listen to me, Ellie," he commanded, his voice weak but absolute. "Harrison has a file in his briefcase. It contains new passports, untraceable offshore accounts, and a new identity for you and your mother. The hospital in Switzerland is already paid for." "No," she sobbed, pressing her hands against his bleeding side, trying desperately to apply pressure. "Stop talking. The medics are coming." My father will use this attack to justify open war. Sebastian continued, ignoring her tears. I won't be able to protect you while I'm dismantling the Castellano syndicate. You have to take the file. You have to disappear. The contract is void, Ellie. You're free. Tears streamed down her face, mixing with the dust and drywall on her cheeks. You don't get to do this. You don't get to kidnap me. Marry me, make me fall for you, and then send me away. Sebastian's eyes widened slightly. A faint, bloody smile touched the corners of his mouth. You fell for me, the ruthless monster. You're an idiot, she cried, pressing harder on the wound. The service doors at the end of the hall blew open, and a swarm of men in tactical gear flooded the room, led by a frantic Harrison and 2 men carrying medical bags. They swarmed Sebastian, pulling her hands away from him. The next 48 hours were a blur of sterile safe-house walls, hushed voices, and agonizing waiting. Sebastian survived surgery to repair a torn oblique muscle. While he was unconscious, Vincenzo Russo, his terrifying father, attempted to seize control of the family's assets. He underestimated his son. Even from a hospital bed, Sebastian had already set a counter-coup in motion. Within 2 days, Vincenzo was forced into permanent retirement in Sicily, and Lorenzo Castellano was found floating in the East River. Sebastian was now the undisputed, absolute don of the Russo syndicate. A week later, she stood in the private study of the Staten Island estate. The library had been fully repaired, the shattered glass replaced with bulletproof panels. Sebastian sat behind the mahogany desk. He looked pale, favoring his left side, but the terrifying aura of power was back in full force. Harrison stood silently in the corner. On the desk between Sebastian and her sat a manila envelope. Your new life, Ellie, Sebastian said, quietly, pushing the envelope across the polished wood. Flight leaves for Geneva in 4 hours. Your mother is already on board a private medical transport. She looked at the envelope. It contained freedom. It contained safety. It was everything she had wanted before she spilled that cup of coffee. She looked up at Sebastian. His mask was perfectly in place, but his hands were clenched into white-knuckled fists on the desk. He didn't want her to go. He was letting her go because he loved her enough to let her survive. She reached out and picked up the envelope. She didn't open it. Instead, she gripped it in both hands and tore it directly down the middle. Harrison gasped. Sebastian froze, his dark eyes snapping up to meet hers in shock. She tossed the shredded pieces of her new identity into the trash can next to the desk. I'm not going to Geneva. Ellie, you don't understand the world you're choosing. Sebastian started standing up aggressively, wincing as he pulled his stitches. I understand exactly what I'm choosing, she interrupted, planting her hands on the desk and leaning in, matching his energy. My father was a coward who ran from his debts. I am not him. You want to legitimize this family. You want to build casinos in Vegas and leave the bloodshed behind. You can't do it alone. You need me. The Nevada Gaming Commission loved me. Sebastian stared at her, completely disarmed. For the first time since she met him, the feared Mafia boss was speechless. I signed a 2-year contract, she said softly, walking around the desk. She stopped right in front of him, resting her hands gently on his chest, mindful of his bandages. And I don't break my contracts, Mr. Russo. So unless you want to fire your wife, I suggest you tell Harrison to go home. We have a gala to plan. Sebastian let out a breath that sounded like a laugh, a deep, resonant sound that vibrated against her palms. He wrapped his massive arms around her waist, pulling her flush against him, burying his face in the crook of her neck. You are terrifying, Maya Mowgli, he murmured, pressing a hot kiss to her skin. I learned from the best, she whispered back. The golden cage was gone. The doors were wide open. But as his lips finally met hers, bruising and desperate and real, she knew she was exactly where she belonged. The barista from Queens didn't just survive the Mafia kingpin, she became his queen. Did you see that massive plot twist, coming Ellie's journey from a struggling barista in Brooklyn to the undisputed queen of the Russo Empire is the ultimate Mafia romance thrill ride. If this intense story of deception, survival, and unexpected love kept you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button right now. Drop a comment below, telling us what you would have done if you found out your marriage was a setup. Don't forget to subscribe and share this video with your friends. Turn on notifications so you never miss our next gripping real-life story.